The violation notice came at 10:47 p.m. on a Tuesday, slapped onto my front door while I was still running the bandsaw in my workshop behind the house. I found it when I came inside for water, my arms aching from milling the last of the Douglas fir logs that Mike Henderson needed for his roof trusses by Friday. The letter was printed on cream-colored cardstock with the Pinecrest Meadows HOA letterhead, signed by one Sharon Pemberton, and it informed me that I was being fined $500 for operating a commercial business in a residential zone after permitted hours. I stood there in my sawdust-covered jeans, reading the thing 3 times before the words actually sank in. My name is Aaron Voss, and I had been running my small sawmill operation out of my backyard workshop in Bend, Oregon for the past 11 years without a single complaint. Not one. In fact, most of the neighborhood had used my services at some point. The Hendersons needed lumber for their addition. The Clarks got all their deck boards from me. Even old Mrs. Patterson 2 streets over had me mill custom trim pieces for her Victorian restoration project. But apparently, Sharon Pemberton had moved into the neighborhood 6 months ago, taken over as HOA president 3 months ago, and decided that my 40 years of woodworking experience and the service I provided to this community were somehow a problem. I crumpled the notice and tossed it on the kitchen counter, then grabbed my phone and called Mike Henderson. He picked up on the second ring. "Hey, Aaron, those trusses coming along okay?" "They will be," I said, "but I just got an HOA violation notice. $500 fine for operating after hours." There was a long pause on the other end. "You are kidding me." "Wish I was. Some woman named Sharon Pemberton signed it." Mike groaned. "Oh God, her. She tried to fine me last month because my garbage cans were visible from the street on a non-collection day. I had just gotten home from work and had not brought them in yet. She took a photo at 6:15 p.m. and had a violation notice printed by 7 o'clock. Sounds like a real piece of work. She is. Look, Aaron, you need those trusses done, and I need my roof finished before the rain comes. What are we going to do about this?" I looked out my kitchen window at the workshop, a sturdy 1,200 square foot building that my father and I had built together back in 1984. The lights were still on, and I could see the partially milled lumber stacked on my work tables. This shop had produced the framing lumber for at least 30 homes in Bend over the years, not to mention countless renovations, additions, and custom projects. My father had started the business in 1973, and when he passed in 2009, I kept it going because it was what I knew, what I loved, and what this community needed. "I am going to finish your trusses," I said, "and then I am going to deal with this HOA nonsense." I worked until 2 a.m. that night, and when I finally shut down the bandsaw and locked up the workshop, I found another violation notice on my front door. This one was dated 11:53 p.m. and informed me that I was being fined an additional $750 for continued operation of a commercial business after receiving a cease and desist order. Now I was angry. I ripped the notice off my door and marched back inside, pulling up the HOA bylaws on my computer. I had read them when I bought this property in 1998, and I remembered there being provisions for home-based businesses as long as they did not create excessive noise, traffic, or nuisance for neighbors. My workshop was well insulated, sat at the back of my 2-acre lot, and most of my clients either picked up their orders or I delivered them myself in my truck. I spent the next hour reading through every page of the bylaws, and sure enough, there it was in Section 7.3. Home-based businesses are permitted provided they do not generate noise exceeding 55 decibels at the property line between the hours of 10 o'clock p.m. and 7 o'clock a.m., Do not create parking issues on community streets, and do not involve the storage of hazardous materials visible from neighboring properties. I had done a sound test years ago when the Mitchells moved in next door with a new baby. My bandsaw at full operation registered 48 decibels at my property line, well within the limits. I had never had more than one customer vehicle at a time, and my lumber was stored in the workshop or under tarps in my fenced backyard, invisible from the street. The next morning, I called the HOA office and got voicemail. I left a detailed message explaining that my business was in full compliance with Section 7.3 of the bylaws and requesting a meeting with Sharon Pemberton. Then I went back to work on Mike's trusses. At 10:15 a.m. my phone rang. Unknown number, local area code. Is this Aaron Voss? A woman's voice, sharp and nasal, speaking. This is Sharon Pemberton from the Pinecrest Meadows HOA. I received your message, and I need to inform you that Section 7.3 was amended at our last board meeting. Home-based businesses are no longer permitted to operate with power tools after 8 o'clock p.m. or before 8 o'clock a.m., regardless of decibel levels. I set down my measuring tape. When was this amendment made? 6 weeks ago. And when were homeowners notified of this change? There was a pause. The minutes were posted on the HOA website. I did not receive any direct notification of a bylaw change that directly affects my livelihood. Mr. Voss, it is the responsibility of each homeowner to stay informed of HOA policies. The bylaws require a 2-week notice period for amendments, which was satisfied by the website posting. Your fines stand, and if you continue to operate outside of permitted hours, the fines will increase by 50% for each subsequent violation. I would like to attend the next board meeting to discuss this. Board meetings are closed to non-board members unless you submit a written request at least 10 days in advance. The next meeting is in 3 weeks. Then I am submitting that request now. It needs to be in writing, Mr. Voss. Email it to the HOA office. She rattled off an email address and hung up before I could respond. I stood there in my workshop, surrounded by decades of sawdust and sweat, and felt something twist in my chest. This was not about noise or nuisance. This was about control. Sharon Pemberton had moved into this neighborhood and decided she was going to run things her way, regardless of how it affected the people who had been here for years. But I was not going to roll over. Not for her, not for anyone. I finished Mike's trusses by Thursday afternoon, loaded them into my truck, and delivered them to his construction site on the east side of town. Mike and his crew helped me unload, and as we stacked the last of the lumber, he pulled me aside. How much do I owe you? $1,800. He wrote me a check, then hesitated. Aaron, I hate to ask this, but I am going to need more lumber in about a month. The Johnsons just hired me to frame their garage addition, and they specifically asked if I could get you to mill their lumber. They want that same grade Douglas fir you sourced for my project. I will do it, I said. Do not worry about the HOA, I will figure it out. If you need me to speak at that board meeting, I will be there. I appreciate that. I drove home with Mike's check in my pocket and 2 more violation notices on my door. Both dated from the previous night, both claiming I had operated power equipment after 8 o'clock p.m. The fines now totaled $3,000. $3,000 for doing the work I had done for over a decade without complaint, for providing a service that had helped build half the homes in this town, for keeping alive a business my father started and taught me to run with his own calloused hands. I sat down at my kitchen table and drafted an email to the HOA office requesting time at the next board meeting. I kept it professional, outlined my compliance with the original bylaws, and explained the economic impact my business had on the community. I attached photos of projects I had done for various neighbors, letters of recommendation from past clients, and documentation of my sound testing. Then I sent it and waited. 3 days later, I received a response. My request had been received and would be reviewed by the board. I would be notified of their decision within 10 business days. In the meantime, I had work to do. The Johnsons needed an estimate for their garage lumber, and I had a standing order from Dave Morton for oak planks he was using for a custom dining table. But I was stuck. If I ran my equipment after 8 p.m., I would get fined. If I could not run my equipment when I needed to, I would lose clients and income. So I adapted. I started getting up at 5 a.m. and running the sawmill until 7:45 a.m., taking a break until 8 a.m. when I was legally allowed to resume, and then working straight through until 8 p.m. It was exhausting, and it meant I could not take on as many projects, but it kept me compliant with Sharon's new rules while I waited for my board meeting. Except the violation notices kept coming. On a Friday morning, I found one dated 7:32 a.m. I was fined for operating power equipment before permitted hours. I checked my logs. I had not even turned on the bandsaw until 7:55 a.m. that day. The notice included a timestamp from a noise complaint called in by a concerned neighbor, but no name. I called the HOA office again. Voicemail. I left a message disputing the violation and requesting evidence of the noise complaint. No one called me back. On Monday, I received a certified letter informing me that my total fines now exceeded $5,000 and that if they were not paid within 30 days, the HOA would place a lien on my property. A lien on the property my father and I had built our lives on. The property where I had learned to mill lumber at his side, where I had taught my own son before he went off to college, where I had provided a service to this community for more than 4 decades. I called a lawyer. Her name was Catherine Grant, and she had an office downtown on Wall Street. I explained the situation, showed her the violation notices, the bylaws, the amendment, and the timeline. She listened, took notes, and when I finished, she leaned back in her chair. "This is harassment," she said flatly. The HOA amended the bylaws without proper notification. They are issuing violations for activity that did not occur, and they are threatening your property over fines that are not legally enforceable. Can they really put a lien on my house? They can try, but it would not hold up in court. However, fighting a lien is expensive and time-consuming. What we need to do is get ahead of this before it reaches that point. How? First, I am going to draft a cease and desist letter to the HOA, demanding they stop issuing false violations and provide evidence for every noise complaint they have on file. Second, I am going to request a full audit of their amendment process to ensure they followed proper procedure. Third, we are going to that board meeting, and we are going to make it very clear that if they continue this behavior, we will pursue legal action for harassment and damages. How much is this going to cost me? Catherine quoted me her hourly rate, and I winced. It was not cheap, but losing my business and my property would cost me a hell of a lot more. "Do it," I said. She drafted the letter that afternoon, and it went out the next day via certified mail. I also sent a copy to every member of the HOA board, which I had looked up in the community directory. There were 5 members: Sharon Pemberton as president, a man named Gregory Holmes as vice president, and 3 others I did not recognize. 2 days later, I got a phone call from Gregory Holmes. He sounded tired. "Mr. Voss, I received your lawyer's letter, and I want you to know that not everyone on this board agrees with how Sharon has been handling your situation. Then why has not anyone stopped her? Because she controls the meetings. She schedules them, she sets the agendas, and she railroads through decisions before anyone can raise objections. The bylaw amendment about your business, that was presented as a minor procedural update and voted on in about 30 seconds. I did not even realize what it meant until after the meeting when I read the full text. So, what are you telling me? I am telling you that I will be voting to rescind those fines at the next meeting, and I will be supporting your right to continue operating your business. But I cannot promise you that Sharon will not make this difficult. She already has. I know. And I am sorry. Your father was a good man, and you have done right by this community. This is not how we should be treating you. It was the first genuine apology I had gotten through this whole mess, and it caught me off guard. Thank you, I said. I appreciate that. See you at the meeting. The board meeting was scheduled for a Tuesday evening at 7:00 p.m. in the community center. I showed up at 6:45 with Catherine Grant, a folder full of documentation, and a knot in my stomach. The community center was a modest building near the entrance of the neighborhood with a meeting room that could hold about 50 people. When we walked in, there were already a dozen neighbors sitting in the folding chairs, and I recognized most of them. Mike Henderson was there, along with Dave Morton, the Clarks, and several others who had used my services over the years. Sharon Pemberton was seated at a table at the front of the room, shuffling papers. She was exactly what I had expected. Mid-50s, blonde hair in a severe bob, a pantsuit that looked like it cost more than my truck, and an expression that could curdle milk. Gregory Holmes sat to her right, and the 3 other board members filled out the rest of the table. At 7:00 p.m. sharp, Sharon called the meeting to order. She ran through the standard opening procedures, approved the minutes from the last meeting, and then moved to new business. We have a request from Mr. Aaron Voss to address the board regarding recent HOA violations, she said, her tone making it clear she would rather be doing anything else. Mr. Voss, you have 5 minutes. I stood up, and Catherine stood with me. Actually, per HOA bylaws, homeowners addressing the board are entitled to 10 minutes unless the board votes to limit that time. Sharon's jaw tightened. Fine, 10 minutes, starting now. I walked to the front of the room and faced the board. My name is Aaron Voss. I have lived in this neighborhood for 26 years and have operated a small sawmill and woodworking business out of my property for all of that time. My father started this business in 1973, and it has served this community by providing custom milled lumber for construction, renovation, and woodworking projects. Over the past 4 decades, my shop has produced the framing lumber for at least 30 homes in Bend, including several in this neighborhood. I pulled out a stack of photos and handed them to Gregory, who passed them down the table. These are just some of the projects I have completed for our neighbors. Mike Henderson's home addition, the Clark family's deck, Mrs. Patterson's Victorian trim, Dave Morton's custom furniture. This is not some fly-by-night operation. This is a legitimate business that has been part of this community for longer than most of the people in this room have lived here. Sharon tapped her pen on the table. Mr. Voss, no one is disputing that you provide a service. What we are addressing is the fact that you are operating a commercial business in a residential zone in violation of HOA bylaws. I am operating in full compliance with Section 7.3 of the original bylaws, I said. I have sound testing documentation showing that my equipment does not exceed the 55 decibel limit at my property line. I do not generate excessive traffic. I do not store hazardous materials in view of neighbors. I have done everything by the book. The bylaws were amended, Sharon said. You were notified via the HOA website as required. Catherine stepped forward. Mrs. Pemberton, we have reviewed the amendment process, and there are several procedural irregularities. The bylaws require that any amendment affecting homeowners' property use rights must be announced via direct written notice at least 30 days before the vote. Posting on a website does not satisfy that requirement. The bylaws say notification can be provided via any method that ensures reasonable access to information. And yet Mr. Voss, the only homeowner directly affected by this amendment, never received direct notice. Neither did several other homeowners we have spoken to. That does not meet the standard of reasonable access. Sharon's face was turning red. Are you accusing this board of violating procedure? I am pointing out that the amendment may not be legally enforceable, which means the violations issued under that amendment are also not enforceable. Gregory Holmes cleared his throat. Sharon, maybe we should consider rescinding the fines while we review the notification process. If there was an error, we need to correct it. There was no error, Sharon snapped. The process was followed exactly as written. Then you would not mind if we conduct an independent review, Catherine said smoothly, just to ensure everything is in order. One of the other board members, a woman named Lisa something, raised her hand. I actually did not remember voting on this amendment. Can we see the minutes from that meeting? Sharon shuffled through her papers and produced a single sheet. Here. It was approved unanimously. Gregory took the paper and read it, his frown deepening. Sharon, this says the amendment was for noise ordinance clarification. It does not mention anything about restricting home-based businesses. That was the intent of the clarification. That is not what we were told when we voted. The room was getting tense. I could see several of the neighbors leaning forward in their seats, listening intently. Mike Henderson raised his hand. Can neighbors speak? Sharon looked like she wanted to say no, but Gregory nodded. Sure, Mike, go ahead. Mike stood up. I just want to say that Aaron has been nothing but professional and helpful to everyone in this community. When my wife and I needed lumber for our addition, he gave us a fair price, delivered on time, and the quality was outstanding. He worked around our schedule, and I never once heard his equipment from my house, even though we are only 3 streets away. This feels like we are punishing someone for being a good neighbor, and I do not understand why. Dave Morton stood up next. I will second that. Aaron milled the oak for my dining table last year, and he did an incredible job. He is an artist, and he is providing a service that we cannot get anywhere else in town without driving to Portland. Why would we want to shut that down? One by one, neighbors stood up and spoke in my defense. The Clarks talked about their deck. Mrs. Patterson described how I had sourced period-appropriate wood for her restoration. Even people I had not worked with directly spoke up, saying they valued having a skilled craftsman in the neighborhood and appreciated that I kept my operation low-key and respectful. Sharon's face got redder with each testimonial, and finally, she cut in. This is not about whether Mr. Voss is a nice person or does good work. This is about following HOA rules and maintaining property values. Commercial businesses do not belong in residential neighborhoods, period. That is not what the bylaws say, Catherine interjected. And even if it were, you cannot retroactively punish someone for an activity that was permitted when they started it. That is called an ex post facto enforcement, and it is not legal. I think we need to table this discussion and review the bylaws more carefully, Gregory said. I move that we rescind all fines against Mr. Voss pending a full review of the amendment process and the original bylaws. I second, Lisa said immediately. Sharon looked furious. We cannot just rescind fines because people complain. That sets a dangerous precedent. We can rescind fines if they were issued in error, Gregory said firmly, which is what we are determining. Let us vote, all in favor of rescinding the fines pending review. Gregory, Lisa, and the two other board members raised their hands. Sharon sat with her arms crossed. Motion carries, Gregory said. Mr. Voss, your fines are rescinded. We will conduct a review and notify you of our findings within 30 days. I felt the tension drain out of my shoulders. Thank you. Sharon stood up abruptly. This meeting is adjourned. She grabbed her papers and walked out, her heels clicking on the linoleum floor. The rest of the board members looked uncomfortable, but Gregory came over and shook my hand. I am sorry about all this, Aaron. We will get it sorted out. I appreciate it. Catherine and I left the community center with a small crowd of neighbors who wanted to shake my hand and offer support. Mike Henderson clapped me on the back. That was wild. I have never seen Sharon lose a vote before. Let us hope it sticks, I said. It did not. 3 days later, I received another certified letter from the HOA. This one informed me that the board had conducted an emergency review of the previous meeting and determined that the vote to rescind my fines was invalid because it had not been on the original meeting agenda. Therefore, the fines were reinstated, and I now owed an additional $1,000 for frivolous use of board meeting time. I called Catherine immediately. She cannot do this, Catherine said, and I could hear the anger in her voice. This is blatant retaliation. We are filing a lawsuit. Against the HOA, against Sharon Pemberton personally, and against the HOA board for allowing this to continue. This has gone beyond a bylaw dispute. This is harassment, and we are going to stop it. The lawsuit was filed the following week. It named Sharon Pemberton and the Pinecrest Meadows HOA as defendants and sought an injunction against further violations, compensation for legal fees and emotional distress, and a court order requiring the HOA to follow proper procedures for bylaw amendments. Sharon did not take it well. 2 days after she was served with the lawsuit, I came home to find my workshop padlocked. There was a notice on the door stating that the HOA had exercised its right to secure non-compliant structures pending resolution of legal disputes. I stood there staring at the padlock, feeling something dark and furious rising in my chest. This was not about bylaws anymore. This was personal. Sharon Pemberton was trying to destroy my livelihood, and she was doing it because I had dared to stand up to her. I took photos of the padlock and the notice, then called Catherine and the police. The police arrived first. I explained the situation to Officer Ramirez, who looked at the padlock and shook his head. This is a civil matter, Mr. Voss. We cannot cut the lock without a court order. She broke into my property and vandalized it. Did she break anything? She put a padlock on my building. Did she damage the building itself? No, but she is preventing me from accessing my own property. Officer Ramirez looked sympathetic but unhelpful. I understand your frustration, but unless there is evidence of forced entry or property damage, this is a dispute between you and your HOA. You will need to take it up in civil court. He left, and Catherine arrived 20 minutes later. She took one look at the padlock and pulled out her phone. I am calling the judge. We are getting an emergency hearing. The emergency hearing was scheduled for the next afternoon. Catherine, Sharon Pemberton, and I all stood before Judge Patricia Holloway in a small courtroom that smelled like old wood and stale coffee. Catherine presented the evidence, the timeline of violations, the questionable amendment process, the retaliatory fines, and now the padlocking of my workshop. Sharon's lawyer, a slick-looking guy named Martin Reeves, argued that the HOA had every right to secure non-compliant structures, and that Mr. Voss was simply upset about being held accountable for breaking the rules. Judge Holloway listened to both sides, reviewed the documents, and then looked at Sharon. "Mrs. Pemberton, when was this amendment to the bylaws voted on?" "8 weeks ago, Your Honor." "And how was Mr. Voss notified?" "It was posted on the HOA website as required by our bylaws." "I have reviewed your bylaws, and they state that amendments affecting property use rights must be communicated via written notice to affected homeowners. Posting on a website does not satisfy that requirement." "Your Honor, our interpretation was that the website constitutes written notice." "Your interpretation is incorrect. The amendment is invalid, which means all violations issued under that amendment are also invalid. Additionally, you had no legal authority to padlock Mr. Voss's workshop. That is an unlawful seizure of private property." Sharon's face went white. "Your Honor, we were simply trying to prevent further violations of a rule that does not exist. Mrs. Pemberton, I am ordering you to remove that padlock immediately and to cease issuing any further violations to Mr. Voss related to his business operations. If you continue this behavior, I will hold you in contempt of court. Do you understand?" "Yes, Your Honor." "Mr. Voss, you are free to resume your business activities in accordance with the original bylaws. If the HOA wishes to amend those bylaws in the future, they must follow proper procedure and provide you with direct written notice. This hearing is adjourned." We walked out of the courthouse, and I felt like I could breathe again. Catherine was practically glowing. That was a solid win. "She is not going to bother you anymore." "I hope you are right." The padlock was removed that evening, and for a few days, everything was quiet. I went back to work, finished Dave Morton's oak planks, and started on the lumber order for the Johnsons' garage. Life returned to something resembling normal, but Sharon Pemberton was not done. 2 weeks later, the city code enforcement officer showed up at my door. His name was Brian Talbot, and he had a clipboard and a very apologetic expression. "Mr. Voss, I hate to bother you, but I received a complaint about your business operating without a proper commercial permit." I blinked. "I have a home occupation permit. I have had one for over a decade." "Can I see it?" I went inside, dug through my file cabinet, and found the permit. It was dated 2003 and approved for small-scale woodworking and lumber milling for personal and commissioned projects. Brian looked at it and nodded. "This looks good, but the complaint alleges that you are operating beyond the scope of a home occupation. They claim you are running a full commercial sawmill with heavy equipment and industrial-level production." "Who filed the complaint?" He hesitated. "I cannot disclose that, but it came through the HOA." "Of course it did. Brian, I am running the same operation I have always run. I have a bandsaw, a planer, a table saw, and some hand tools. I do small custom jobs for local clients. This is not a lumber mill operation. I am not processing thousands of board feet a day. I am a craftsman, not a factory." "I believe you, but I have to do an inspection to verify." "Can I see the workshop?" I walked him out to the shop and showed him around. He took notes, measured my equipment, checked my storage, and asked about my client volume. After about 30 minutes, he closed his clipboard. "Mr. Voss, everything here looks compliant with your home occupation permit. You are well within the limits for equipment size, noise, and production volume. I will file a report clearing you of the complaint. Thank you. For what it is worth, I think someone is just trying to make your life difficult. If you get any more complaints, let me know. I will document the pattern." He left, and I sat down on my workbench exhausted. This was never going to end. Sharon was going to keep coming after me with every tool she could find, and eventually she was going to wear me down. But I was not ready to give up yet. I called Gregory Holmes. We need to remove Sharon from the board. I know, he said, but it is not that simple. She was elected by the homeowners, and we cannot just kick her out without cause. She has been harassing me for months. She issued illegal fines, padlocked my workshop, and now she is filing false complaints with the city. That is not cause enough. It might be, but we would need to call a special meeting and vote on it, and that requires a majority of homeowners to attend. Getting that kind of turnout is nearly impossible. What if we had proof that she was misusing HOA funds or violating her fiduciary duty? There was a long pause. Do you have proof of that? No, but I am starting to wonder if we should look, Gregory sighed. Let me talk to the other board members. If there is something there, we need to know about it. 2 days later, Gregory called me back. We audited the HOA accounts. Aaron, you need to see this. We met at a coffee shop on Galveston Avenue, and Gregory brought a laptop and a folder full of printouts. He opened the laptop and showed me a spreadsheet. This is the HOA budget for the past year. Notice anything unusual? I scanned the columns. Most of it was standard stuff: landscaping, community center maintenance, insurance. But there was a line item labeled administrative consulting that had ballooned from $5,000 the previous year to $32,000 this year. What is administrative consulting? That is what we wanted to know, so we dug into the invoices. Turns out Sharon hired her sister's company to provide management consulting services for the HOA. The company is called Pemberton Solutions, LLC. You are kidding. I wish I was. She has been funneling HOA funds to her sister for months, and she never disclosed the conflict of interest to the board. That is embezzlement. I leaned back in my chair, stunned. Have you reported this? Not yet. We wanted to talk to you first because this affects your lawsuit. If Sharon has been embezzling HOA funds, that is criminal and it changes everything. We need to report it. I agree, but I want you to know that this is going to blow up the HOA. There will be investigations, legal fees, and a lot of very angry homeowners. It is going to get messy. It is already messy, I said. Let us just make sure it ends right. Gregory filed a report with the Bend Police Department the next day. Detective Lisa Morneau took the case and started investigating. She interviewed board members, reviewed financial records, and subpoenaed documents from Pemberton Solutions, LLC. It took 3 weeks, but the evidence was damning. Sharon had awarded her sister's company over $30,000 in contracts without disclosing the relationship, without competitive bidding, and without any documentation of the services actually provided. She had also used HOA funds to pay for personal expenses, including a spa weekend and several dinners at high-end restaurants, all disguised as business meetings. On a Thursday morning in late September, Detective Morneau arrested Sharon Pemberton at her home. She was charged with embezzlement, fraud, and misuse of HOA funds. The charges carried a potential sentence of up to 5 years in prison. The neighborhood was in shock. People who had supported Sharon, who had trusted her to manage the HOA, felt betrayed. The local newspaper ran a story about the arrest, and suddenly, my dispute over the Sawmill looked like a footnote in a much larger scandal. The HOA board held an emergency meeting and voted to remove Sharon as president. Gregory Holmes was appointed interim president, and one of the first things he did was issue a formal apology to me on behalf of the board. Aaron, we are deeply sorry for what you have been through. Sharon abused her position and we failed to stop her. We are committed to making this right. I appreciate that. We are also going to revisit the bylaw amendment. It is clear that it was pushed through improperly, and we are going to rescind it. Your business is welcome in this neighborhood, and we will make sure the bylaws reflect that. The bylaw amendment was formally rescinded at the next board meeting, and the HOA issued a public statement affirming my right to operate my sawmill in accordance with the original bylaws. The violation notices were expunged from my record, and the HOA agreed to cover my legal fees as part of a settlement. Catherine was thrilled. This is about as good an outcome as we could have hoped for. I just want to get back to work, I said, and I did. The Johnsons' garage lumber was delivered on time, and I started taking on new projects. Word spread about what had happened, and I got calls from people all over Bend who wanted to support my business. Some of them needed lumber, some needed custom woodworking, and some just wanted to say they appreciated what I had stood up for. Sharon Pemberton's trial was set for the following spring. In the meantime, she was released on bail and ordered to stay away from all HOA activities. I heard through the grapevine that her husband had filed for divorce and that her sister's company had gone out of business. I did not take any pleasure in her downfall. What she had done was wrong, and she deserved to face the consequences, but I also knew that she had destroyed her own life in the process. That was punishment enough. As for me, I went back to doing what I loved. My bandsaw hummed in the workshop, cutting clean lines through Douglas fir and oak and pine. I milled lumber for new homes, old renovations, and custom projects that required a craftsman's touch. I kept my father's legacy alive, and I did it with the support of a community that had stood by me when it mattered most. On a crisp October morning, I was in the workshop planing a stack of cedar boards when I heard a knock on the door. I looked up to see Mike Henderson standing there with a grin on his face. "Hey, Aaron, got a minute?" "Sure, what is up?" "I just got a call from a developer who is building a new neighborhood on the west side of town. They are looking for someone to mill custom lumber for the framing. I told them you were the best in the business, and they want to meet with you." I set down the planer and wiped my hands on my jeans. How big of a project? 30 homes, all custom builds. They want locally sourced lumber and a craftsman who can deliver quality. I told them that was you. I thought about my father, about the years we had spent building this business together, about the homes we had framed and the clients we had served. This was what we had worked for. This was the legacy. "Set up the meeting," I said. "I am in." Mike shook my hand. "I knew you would be." The meeting with the developer went well. His name was Richard Calloway, and he was impressed by my portfolio and my reputation. We negotiated a contract for milling the framing lumber for all 30 homes, and I hired 2 apprentices to help me keep up with the volume. It was the biggest project I had ever taken on, and it was going to keep me busy for the next 2 years. The work was hard, but it was good. I spent long days in the workshop, teaching my apprentices the skills my father had taught me and watching them grow into craftsmen in their own right. We milled thousands of board feet of Douglas fir, cedar, and hemlock, and every piece that left my shop met the same standard of quality that I had held for 40 years. Sharon Pemberton's trial took place in April. She was convicted on all counts and sentenced to 3 years in prison, with 2 years suspended. She was also ordered to pay restitution to the HOA and to perform community service. I did not attend the trial, but Gregory called me afterward to let me know the outcome. "Justice was served," he said, "and the HOA is in a much better place now. We have new leadership, new policies, and a renewed commitment to supporting the people who make this community what it is." I am glad to hear it. Aaron, I want you to know that what you did, standing up to Sharon and fighting for your business, that inspired a lot of people. You reminded us that the HOA is supposed to serve the homeowners, not the other way around. Thank you for that. I just did what I had to do. That is what makes it count. I hung up the phone and walked out to the workshop, where my apprentices were milling the last of the lumber for Richard Callaway's development. The bandsaw hummed, the air smelled of fresh cut wood, and the sun streamed through the windows. This was my place, my work, my life. And no one was going to take it away from me. Over the next year, the 30 homes went up, framed with lumber from my shop. I drove past the development one afternoon and stopped to watch the construction crews at work. The frames stood tall and strong, the beams fitting together with the precision that only custom milling could provide. It was beautiful, and it was mine. One of the construction workers saw me standing there and waved. "You Aaron Voss. That is me. Just wanted to say thanks. This lumber is the best we have ever worked with. Makes our job a hell of a lot easier." Happy to help. I got back in my truck and drove home, past the Pinecrest Meadows sign and through the neighborhood where I had lived for over 2 decades. The streets were quiet, the lawns were green, and the homes stood solid and welcoming. This was my community, and I had fought for my place in it. When I pulled into my driveway, I saw a car I did not recognize parked out front. A woman got out as I approached, and I realized it was Catherine Grant. "Catherine, what are you doing here?" "I wanted to bring you something." She handed me a check. "This is the settlement from the HOA. They agreed to cover all your legal fees and provide compensation for the harassment and emotional distress. It is not a fortune, but it is something." I looked at the check. It was enough to upgrade some of my equipment and hire another apprentice. It was enough to invest in the future of my business. "Thank you, Catherine, for everything. You did the hard part, Aaron. I just made sure the law was on your side." She left, and I went inside to call my son. He was living in Seattle now, working as an architect, but he still called every week to check in. "Hey, Dad, how is it going?" "Good, really good. I just finished a big project, and I have got more work lined up than I can handle." "That is great." "I am proud of you, you know." "For what?" "For standing up for what you believed in. For not letting them push you around. Grandpa would have been proud too." I felt a lump in my throat. "Thanks, son. That means a lot." We talked for a while longer, and after we hung up, I walked out to the workshop one last time. The sun was setting, casting long shadows across the yard, and the air was cool and still. I stood in the doorway, looking at the tools and the lumber and the decades of work that filled this space, and I felt something settle in my chest. This was home. This was where I belonged. And no HOA, no Sharon Pemberton, no one was ever going to take that away from me again. I turned off the lights and locked the door, then walked back to the house. Tomorrow, I would start on a new project. Tomorrow, I would teach my apprentices another lesson. Tomorrow, I would continue the work my father started and the legacy he left behind. But tonight, I was just going to sit on my porch, drink a beer, and enjoy the quiet. I had earned it. The months rolled by, and the business continued to grow. Richard Callaway referred me to other developers, and soon I was milling lumber for projects all over Bend and the surrounding areas. My apprentices became skilled craftsmen, and I promoted one of them, a young man named Daniel Marsh, to shop manager so I could focus on the custom projects and client relations. The neighborhood changed too. With Sharon gone, the HOA became less about enforcement and more about community. They organized block parties, neighborhood cleanups, and holiday events. Gregory Holmes proved to be a thoughtful and fair president, and under his leadership, the HOA became something people actually wanted to be part of. One Saturday afternoon in June, the HOA hosted a community picnic at the park near the entrance of Pinecrest Meadows. I was not much for social events, but Mike Henderson convinced me to go, and I brought a cooler of drinks and a plate of ribs I had smoked the night before. The park was packed with families, kids running around, dogs barking, and neighbors catching up. I found a spot under a tree and set up my cooler, and within minutes, people started coming over to say hello. The Johnsons thanked me again for the garage lumber. Dave Morton showed me photos of the dining table I had milled for him, now finished and beautiful. Mrs. Patterson told me she had recommended my services to a friend who was restoring a historic home in downtown Bend. It felt good. It felt like community. Gregory found me later in the afternoon and pulled me aside. "Aaron, I wanted to let you know that we are updating the HOA bylaws, and we are including a section specifically protecting home-based businesses like yours. We want to make sure what happened with Sharon never happens again." "I appreciate that, Gregory. Really. You earned it. And I want you to know that the board voted to name you Neighbor of the Year. We are going to present the award at the next meeting." I did not know what to say. I had never been much for awards or recognition, but this felt different. This felt like the community was saying, "We see you. We value you. You belong here." "Thank you," I said. "That means more than you know." The award ceremony was held at the next board meeting, and to my surprise, the community center was packed. Neighbors filled every seat, and some were standing in the back. Gregory called me up to the front and presented me with a plaque that read, "Aaron Voss, Neighbor of the Year, for dedication to community, integrity in business, and courage in standing up for what is right." People clapped and a few of them stood up. Mike Henderson whistled. Dave Morton shouted, "Speech." I held the plaque and looked out at the crowd, at the faces of people I had known for years, people I had worked for, people who had stood by me when everything went sideways. And I realized that this was what it was all about. Not the business, not the awards, but the connections, the relationships, the community. "I am not much for speeches," I said, "but I want to say thank you. Thank you for supporting my business, for standing up for me when I needed it, and for reminding me why I do this work. My father taught me that craftsmanship is not just about making things. It is about serving people, about contributing to something bigger than yourself. That is what I have tried to do, and I am grateful that I get to do it here in this community with all of you." The applause was louder this time, and I saw more than a few people wiping their eyes. I stepped down, shook hands with the board members, and made my way back to my seat. Mike clapped me on the back as I sat down, and I just nodded, not trusting myself to speak. That night, I drove home with the plaque on the passenger seat and a sense of peace I had not felt in a long time. The fight with Sharon had been hard, but it had also shown me what mattered. It had forced me to stand up for my beliefs, to defend my livelihood, and to trust that the community would have my back. And they did. I pulled into my driveway and carried the plaque into the house, setting it on the mantel next to a photo of my father in his workshop. He was holding a handsaw, smiling at the camera, sawdust on his shirt and pride in his eyes. "We did it, Dad," I said quietly. We kept the business going. The next morning, I was back in the workshop by 6 a.m. Daniel had already started the bandsaw, and the smell of fresh cut cedar filled the air. We had a big order to fill for a custom home on the outskirts of town, and the client wanted hand-selected boards with no knots or imperfections. It was meticulous work, but it was the kind of project I loved. As I worked, I thought about the journey I had been on over the past year. The violation notices, the fines, the lawsuit, the arrest. It had been a roller coaster, but it had also been a reminder that doing the right thing is not always easy. Sometimes it requires courage, persistence, and a willingness to fight even when the odds seem stacked against you. But in the end, it had been worth it. My business was thriving, my community was stronger, and I had proven that one person standing up for what is right can make a difference. The bandsaw hummed, the cedar boards piled up, and the sun climbed higher in the sky. I worked alongside Daniel, teaching him the tricks my father had taught me, and felt the satisfaction that comes from creating something with your own hands. This was my legacy. This was my life. And I was grateful for every single day of it. Years passed, and the business continued to grow. I took on more apprentices, expanded the workshop, and started offering classes on woodworking and traditional milling techniques. People came from all over Oregon to learn, and I found that teaching was just as rewarding as the work itself. Richard Calloway became a regular client, and his developments always featured lumber from my shop. He told me once that using my lumber was a selling point for his homes, that buyers appreciated the quality and the local connection. "You are not just selling lumber, Aaron," he said. "You are selling craftsmanship. That is rare these days." Sharon Pemberton served her time and was released from prison after 18 months. I heard she moved to California and started over under a different name. I never saw her again, and I was fine with that. What she did to me was wrong, but holding on to anger was not going to change anything. I chose to focus on the good that came out of it. The strengthened community, the updated bylaws, and the relationships that were forged in the fire of that conflict. My son came home for Thanksgiving that year, and I took him out to the workshop to show him the new equipment and introduce him to the apprentices. He walked through the shop, running his hands over the workbenches and the tools, and I saw the same look in his eyes that I must have had when my father first brought me out here. "This place has not changed much," he said. "The tools are better, but the work is the same." "Do you ever think about retiring?" I laughed. "Not a chance. I will be out here until they carry me out." "Good. Because I have been thinking about moving back to Bend. My firm is opening a branch here and they want me to run it. I could use a good carpenter to help with some of my projects." I felt a surge of pride and joy. "You are serious, dead serious. I miss this place, Dad. I miss the community, the mountains, the pace of life, and I want my kids to grow up here the way I did." "You are going to make me cry, kid," he grinned. "Well, do not get too sentimental on me. I am still going to need you to mill some lumber." We both laughed, and I knew in that moment that the legacy was secure. My son was coming home, the business would continue, and the work my father started would live on for another generation. That is all a man can really ask for. The workshop is quiet now as I write this, the bandsaw silent, the tools resting. It is late evening and the sun is setting over the Cascade Mountains, painting the sky in shades of orange and gold. I am sitting at my workbench with a cup of coffee, reflecting on everything that has happened, everything I have learned. The fight with the HOA taught me that standing up for what you believe in is never easy, but it is always worth it. It taught me that community is not just about the place you live, but about the people you stand with. It taught me that one person can make a difference, even when the system seems rigged against you. I did not set out to be a hero or a symbol. I just wanted to do my work, serve my clients, and honor my father's legacy. But sometimes, life pushes you into situations where you have to choose, give in or stand up. I chose to stand up, and I am grateful for everyone who stood with me. The sawmill is still running, the lumber is still being milled, and the homes are still being framed. The shop that built half the homes in this town is still here, still working, still contributing. And as long as I have breath in my lungs and strength in my hands, it will stay that way. Because this is not just a business. It is a legacy. It is a calling. It is who I am. And no HOA, no fine, no violation notice will ever change that. The sun dips below the mountains and the last light fades from the sky. I finish my coffee, turn off the lights, and lock the workshop door. Tomorrow, I will be back at it, teaching Daniel and the other apprentices, milling lumber for new projects and continuing the work that has defined my life. But tonight, I am content. Tonight I am at peace. Tonight I am home, and that is all I ever really needed.